Today on the live stream, we're doing a very special thing. We're going to be talking to the single most important creator that I've ever worked with in my life, and obviously in my lifetime. I met Mike Barron, our special guest today, when I was 24 years old. And we're going to talk a little bit about the genesis of Nexus, and even before the times we met Nexus, which is probably a good place to start. Now, before I met Mike Barron in Madison, Mike Barron was in a different state, and I think Mike Barron was in Boston. Is that correct, man?
Yeah.
So as I recall, before we ever saw Nexus as a glint in your eye, you were living in a different state at the time. I was in Wisconsin, and you were in Boston, correct?
Oh, yeah. I was living in Boston. I moved back to Madison in 1977, and I took that job at the insurance company where I was working. I got a phone call from an editor who said, "There's some guy down here showing us his art, and you should take a look." And he gave me your phone number. You were living at the YMCA.
I was I remember I was doing a lot of networking because just by instinct alone, I knew that you don't keep yourself buried in a room if you want to make contacts. But I know you had a very interesting incident that took place at the paper you were working at in Boston that involved a bunch of Hell's Angels.
The Rum Pot Rustlers.
What were they?
They were called the Rum Pot Rustlers. They were low rent. They made the Hells Angels look like a Navy precision team. And they kept coming in the paper and saying, "You should do an article on us. You should do an article on us." So one night I went down to their clubhouse, and they all got drunk, and they told me how they like to go out and pick up a girl at a bar and then bring her back and drug her and then force sex on her. So I wrote that up. And then they started showing up the newspaper offices. "Where's that Barron guy? Where's that Barron guy?"
Bunch of real charmers.
Yeah.
So eventually, you were in Madison by the time I walked into that local newspaper office, that small-time newspaper office, and
That's right. It was called The Connection, and it was a bunch of strikers. They struck the regular newspaper and put up their own as an alternative. Bunch of lefties.
Well, given that it was Madison, I don't think I could be anything else but a striker. So I walked into that office, the Madison Connection, small-time newspaper, and I said, "Where's the art editor? I want to show him something," because I always had my portfolio around. So things were so easy back then. There was none of this red tape nonsense where you had to wait 10 minutes on the phone to get a real person. So they introduced me right away to the art editor, and I sat down, and he was very friendly and cordial, and I said, "Well, this is what I got. Do you have any use for these newspaper strips that I'm actually being published in the local college that's about a block from your office near the capital of Madison?" He says, "Well, we don't have any need for that," which is, I got a lot of that at the time. "But, I know this guy. You might want to give him a call. His name is Mike Barron." So that's how the whole thing got started. And from there, we just made simple phone calls to each other before the cell phone nonsense came about. And before all this texting garbage came about, we just called each other and we talked on the phone. And we actually followed it up with real person-to-person meetings. So you take it from there. Where do we meet from there?
We met on the steps of the Student Union. Do you remember?
Oh, yeah, the Memorial Union. It was a
Yeah.
beautiful day. I recall it being in August. What do you remember?
Well, it was hot because we were outside. You opened up your portfolio out there on the ground, and I was blown away. I said, "Well, what do you want to do?" And he said, "Well, I want to do comics, but I can't write. What do you want to do?"
And as a matter of fact, you actually pulled out a story you'd already written. Tell us about that.
Oh, I can't remember, and I probably would not want to remember, because in those days, I had a lot to learn about writing. In fact, I learn more about writing every day. And one of the bright spots in my life is just like you, I believe I'm improving as a writer.
Well,
But
as long as you're still improving, I can tell you what we originally worked on, which was Encyclopedia Salesman.
oh, that's right. That's right.
Now, I know you remember what happened with that, right? So the
Well,
story was about,
a guy going door to door in a dystopian future, very much like what we're living through today, trying to sell encyclopedias. But of course, there are many flaws with that story. I failed to imagine the internet, which has made encyclopedias unnecessary. But we were in the right place at the right time. In the capital city distribution, the second largest distributor of comics in the world wanted to publish their own comics. So we went out to their offices on the Beltline and showed them that, and Milt said, "Yeah, we don't want that. We want a superhero." So I went home and I brainstormed Nexus.
what I remember before you tell the whole story about Nexus was Encyclopedia Salesman. Since it was my first actual job, actually, it was not my first actual job. It was my first real job working with a professional writer, which was you. It took me a year to do 24 pages, which I drew, lettered, and inked. And when we got done with them, that's when we showed them to the guys at Capital.
Yeah, yeah.
Hey, this is what we do. Do you want to publish this? And of course, they said no. So you were forced to dream up something a little different than a guy who goes around selling encyclopedias in the future in a bound up. And
Yeah. So I went home and I brainstormed Nexus and I put in all the elements I thought that they wanted, but also the elements that we wanted, in that we both love superhero comics and we wanted an exciting protagonist. And we wanted something that had its own inbuilt attraction. And my first thought was, well, what if every time the protagonist shows up, somebody dies? And that's no great insight. That's why uh, most of the shows that we've been watching in popular entertainment over the past half century are police or military or doctors or lawyers or cowboys, because those people dealt with the stuff of life and death, and that's the stuff of drama. Uh, but I wanted to make him sympathetic. So I made him a reluctant executioner of mass murderers. And I was filling it in as I went along. And as you know, I drew the first 12 pages out by hand.
yeah,
And I gave them to you. And you went home and you penciled, inked, and lettered them. And that's what we showed to the boys at Capitol. And this time their eyes lit up and they said, all right, let's go with it. Now we need 20 more pages.
yeah. One of the things that happened in Madison at the time was there was a lot of bands in the area that were doing what they called album release parties, and that was in the mid '80s. But even before that, I think we probably started the trend of a comic release party. We actually, I think you were the one that set up this little place in the actual union on campus that we actually
That's right.
gather at, and there was pheasant, there was imported caviar, and Milton John finally showed up. We were there. We showed him the first 12 finished pages of Nexus, and on the spot they signed us up, and everything was happy after that.
Well, we were off and running, that's for sure.
That's for sure.
And the first three issues were oversized black and white, and the third one had the flexi disc.
And now there's an interesting story that most people don't know about a friend of yours that actually committed, in quotes, to publishing Nexus before we met Milton John, and we ended up making him a bad guy in the comic in the first, was it?
Steve Sutter?
Yeah, Steve Sutter.
Steve went on to become a recycling magnate in Los Angeles.
And he was the one that promised that he would be the one to take a chance in publishing Nexus, but for some odd reason, something that never happens in the real world, he bowed out at the last minute. Do you remember getting that phone call from him?
Not really.
Yeah, too inconsequential, but we did do the right thing by making him a bad guy that got horribly destroyed by the end of the comic,
That's right.
as
Yeah.
critics. And after that, I remember getting a very professional call from a guy named Rich Bruning, who had an office up at right in the Capitol office buildings. And he came by to see me one day because I was located. I had an apartment that was located within blocks of the Capitol. Now, you were living way over in Mendota, was it?
No, Middleton.
Middleton. Okay, so that was a good 40-minute drive from where I was living. So
Not quite, but
Rich came by, and he just told me very professionally what was going on, and I was very impressed by him. You less so, but he spelled the whole thing out. This is what we're going to do. This is going to be an oversized black and white issue. We can't afford color right now, but maybe in the future we'll look into that. And for some reason, they wanted to go oversized. Do you remember how that came about or why?
nope.
I sure don't. Because eventually, by the first color issue of Nexus, they smartly decided to go to a more standard format, which was the comic book size format of the time, 6x12 or whatever, 6x10 or whatever it was. And that was the first time we got color. We hired a guy from Canada named George Freeman, who we both know, who came from the Captain Canuck comic book that we both liked.
That's right.
And he just did a tremendous amount of work in that to get that issue done. So much so that I don't think he could keep going with it. So he hired a guy named Les Dorscheid, whom I called Leo for the rest of his life because I didn't think that was proper a name for a guy. So I called him Leo, and he stuck with us forever and a day. Now, there was a time I remember that was one of the most memorable of our meeting together because we were always getting together at night or in the afternoon, usually almost always at your pad in Middleton, where we would work out ideas. And that's how everything starts. We were both very young guys, and it was all untried territory. And I remember sitting there with tracing paper in kind of a human mannequin where we would try all these ideas out. You were the one to come up with the two most iconic things in Nexus's costume, which was the yellow lightning bolt and the red visor.
Yeah.
We thought about things like capes and nonsense like that, but we never took to that. But the other time I remember was, besides you giving me my first Loomis book, you were so generous about that, and I still have that book upstairs. It's always been in my bookshelf, but it never leaves my side. Do you remember what you addressed in that book to me? You probably don't, right? But it was something. Do you remember that at all?
No.
Okay, it was something like, if God meant me to draw, he never would have introduced me to Steve Rude.
That's right.
That's coming back to you, huh? So here's another fond recollection that I'll never forget. This was a time when I think we were doing the third black and white issue of Nexus. That's how I remember it. But you know, memories are faulty, especially mine. But we got together at the most prestigious restaurant in Madison. It's called Les Trois.
That's right.
Yeah, okay, so we got together early. It was like 6 o'clock in the evening before the hoi polloi showed up in their tuxes and gowns. And we sat in the back of the bar, and you proceeded to explain to me everything that was going to happen in the book, including, and especially including, the whole story of the secret of Nexus's powers. And you can explain from there, if you can recall it, what was the answer to Nexus's power? How did he accumulate these incredible powers? Because they don't come out of nowhere. So where do they come from?
They came from an insane alien. Of course, when we try to imagine an alien point of view, they may all be insane for as much good as it does us. Because how would it affect the human mind to adapt an alien point of view? It might be impossible. But this alien, whom we called the Merc, decided that he would choose a champion from humanity to be the conscience of its race. And because Nexus arrived on the planet where the Merc dwelt, he chose Nexus and also Nexus, he was able to train Nexus in a way, in that he caused these two phantasms to appear, Alpha and Beta. The only living human beings on this planet were Nexus and his parents, but Alpha and Beta appeared to be real to Nexus, and they looked like little cartoon versions of the Merc. And they were the greatest influence on his life, much more so than his parents.
I also noticed that besides the incredibly, different approach to the standard superhero storytelling, there's so many subtleties. But the one thing people always mention, and I don't know why this is something that would be so special to them, is your sense of humor in this book was so offbeat that people they come up to me and they come up to you and they say, I've never seen a book with the kind of sense of humor you have in a book that is normally would be so grim. But you always had that. And I had this weird Dr. Seuss thing going on at the same time. So
That's
we
right.
made
Well, Shakespeare understood that even the grimmest story has to have a flash of humor. It's like a drop of black paint in a bucket of white paint. And you may not believe this, but it's true. If you add a drop of black paint to a bucket of white paint, it makes the white whiter.
absolutely, and me as an artist would know that. That's something that one of my teachers from MITC, Madison Area Technical College, taught me almost the first day I walked in the painting class. You want to have contrast, uh, put a drop of white in a sea of black, or vice versa. And from there, we finally got the excitement of getting fan letters almost immediately. Now they started out as a sizable amount for a book like that, because no one had ever seen a comic book coming out of anything but New York or the West Coast, and here comes out of nowhere this book from Madison, Wisconsin. And I was still very much an amateur, but you were hitting. I always saw you as hitting things full stride, or at least got a great running leap at the diving board. And from there, we just uh, exponentially just kept going and going. I think that's one of the most exciting things you can see is watching people start from where they start, and then watch them grow like that. I've seen that with a lot of my favorite artists, and there's just nothing quite like that. If somebody comes into things full blown, it's a different kind of reaction that you get from something than if you see them start from scratch and grow into what they're going to be. Have you encountered that before with people you like as artists and writers?
No.
Okay, a man of few words, my friend Mighty Mike Barron.
Well,
Um,
I'm lucky to know a lot of very accomplished people, but they were accomplished when I met them.
yeah,
You know,
you,
one guy,
yeah, one guy.
Kelly Jones.
Okay,
Kelly Jones, when we started working on Dead Man, that's when he became Kelly Jones.
what was he before that? Alfonso
Well,
Neutron.
no, he was Kelly Jones, but his art just transformed during the Dead Man story. Before, it was just generic superhero art, but there was something about Dead Man, and Kelly will tell you the same thing, that he found liberating, and he was able to dive deep into his gothic tendencies and become the artist that he is today. And if you look back at those old Dead Man comics, it's very similar to what he's been doing for the past 40 years.
Yeah, well, the good thing about us is that we are not people that rest on our laurels. We're still pushing as hard as we are. I would have to say that you and I are a couple of the really lucky ones, as opposed to the guys that peak early and this kind of slide downhill from there. We don't really have that gene in us. We just being complacent is just not in our nature. That's just not us. You push all the time. You finally got into the field of the novels you always wanted to become in, and you're always got your hand in comics. So that's probably the perfect time to ask you about the work you're doing nowadays, because you're as fired up about this stuff as you've ever been.
Well, that's true, and I'm sure everybody is aware of this. Our next project is Private American, and you have some involvement with that.
I do.
If we could show your cover,
Yeah, and the conditions behind that was it was your 53rd birthday coming up, and I said, I've got to do something special for the main man here. So that's how that was begotten. I just did this very fun pinup for you with Private American. It was a blast. I called you up and said this has been fun from start to finish, probably because it wasn't a narrative piece. It was just a pinup, and somehow everything about that was just fun from start to finish.
And if people want to know what Private American is, he's everything Captain America should be, but isn't, with a little Punisher thrown in. When we first encounter him, he's on the southern border intercepting snakeheads, people smugglers, drug smugglers, and terrorists. Because somebody has to do something, because our government is encouraging this. And because of this, he becomes a target of the government. Um, Richard Bonk is the artist. He's doing an outstanding job.
And the Thin Line has been out for how long now?
What has?
The Thin Blue Line.
Thin Blue Line has been out for a couple of months now. We're completely fulfilled. We delivered to everybody. It opened up a lot of doors for me. And as you know, doing a pro-police book in this day and age is a very risky enterprise. And we submitted it to every major publisher, and the responses we got were vile, frankly. It was, fuck you, fuck the police, get out of here with your pro-cop shit. Now, 20 or 30 years ago, this wouldn't have raised an eyebrow. But today, with the narrative that has been going on, people have learned to distrust the police. And I have to say that there certainly are bad cops. Nobody denies that. And I'd be happy to give you examples. But this book isn't about them. It's about good cops.
Yeah, and the government certainly has changed since we were kids. But it's always been a little questionable, hasn't it? Like the books I'm reading right now are about the Kennedys and Marilyn Monroe. They want to assert that Marilyn never came close to killing herself with barbiturates. So it's a very interesting book that I'm reading right now, and I happen to kind of be big in conspiracy theories because I'm just kind of drawn to those. In fact, I've got a couple of graves that are coming over later on for a barbecue, so I'll let you know how that goes. But is there any last things you want to talk about? We've got a lot of fans out there and a lot of people that are devoted to Nexus. They're just happy that we're still doing stuff for Nexus, and we're both really striving and excited about the work that we're doing. And that's got to make people really happy to see you doing your stuff and me doing my stuff. And, it's entertainment, and first it's pleasing ourselves. I've always told people that. And then part two is sending the work out there to see people's reactions. And that's how I've always thought about it. How do you think about that?
Well, I had a teaching instructor named Jerry McNeely who worked in television. He was the head writer for Marcus Welby, MD. And he said, you make them laugh a little bit, you make them cry a little bit, you scare the hell out of them, and that's entertainment. And I'll never forget that.
And on that note, I think we've spelled out everything we can for our audience here. And dude, thanks a million for coming on. We'll have you back as soon as we can to expound on more things about the crooked government and everything else we want to talk about. Okay, so adios for right now. That's Mighty Mike Barron. You've heard it here on the Dude Broadcast. Take care, everyone. We'll see you next time.